Welcome to Off Panel, Sketch.com's weekly podcast. On this week's episode, our guest is Corey Murphy, the Director of Sales at Image Comics. Thanks for joining the show, Corey.
Thanks for having me on.
So the first question I wanted to kick off the show with is probably an easy one. It might not be, I'm not sure, but your title is Director of Sales at Image. What exactly is your role at Image, and what does that fancy title mean?
So Director of Sales is really focused on direct market sales, so the bread and butter of what has kind of become the comic book industry. So while book market sales and mass market sales are absolutely areas that we focus on, my direct focus is direct market, brick and mortar stores with local comic book shops and retailers.
Well, in your background's in that. You worked for Laughing Ogre before, right?
That's correct. I was the general manager for both the Virginia locations. For Laughing Ogre, we had a Ohio store, and that's actually, we just had Jeff Stang come and join us, who was the general manager for that location, and he's going to be working for Image as the direct market sales representative.
Oh, wow. That's awesome. Man, Laughing Ogre is taking over.
Yeah, it's exciting to have more retailers joining the publisher ranks. I think, that experience and firsthand knowledge is really something you can't, make up.
Yeah, well, and that was one of the things I was most curious about is, I've talked to people like Joe Keating, who, I don't know if you know this, but he, besides doing Shutter and Ringside at Image, also works at Floating World in Portland one day a week. And
yeah, it's something he and I have actually talked about a lot, his experience and how it's kind of come to change what his expectations are as a creator, having now worked behind the counter and understanding the concerns and restraints that retailers might face that creators might not be aware of.
Yeah, but that was what I was curious about, though, is like, I'm not sure how long you worked at Laughing Ogre, but I'm curious as to, how that background in retail has really helped you in your role at Image and, just kind of understanding the direct market in a more like holistic sense.
Well, I think that a lot of publishers have they believe that they exist in a vacuum. So when you have a retailer looking at their FOC or looking at their initial order pack, doing their orders, it's very easy to think that you're only in competition against your own titles. But once you've done a 450-line FOC list, and then next week it's 500, and it just keeps getting bigger and bigger, you have a better understanding of what kind of questions and concerns as a retailer faced with when they make those orders, where are they cutting their money? I think that, something that my experience when I, go to place those orders, there's nothing more sobering than that line item total. When you're looking at how much money you're spending a week and how much, you stand to gain or lose depending on, your intuition, your sales history, what tools you're using to kind of predict demand in your store. And I think, especially a location that has, or a chain that has multiple locations, you see things work in one store that don't work in another. It's kind of a serving sample of the market at large. So you can kind of see trends as they grow and shift amongst, certain regions, or is it because you have someone who's very passionate about that series or the creator, what is directing demand? And I think once you start to be able to see that on a smaller scale, even, our stores are pretty big locations, so we had a good size to look at. It's something you kind of then expand to the market at large. And I think that's something that a lot of publishers don't have a good concept of. They do in theory. They know that, well, what I'm seeing as a total number is represented across, 3,000 accounts, but it's a lot more complicated than that. And I think having been on the other side of the counter and recognizing, this is the amount of time a creator or a retailer has, and Tuesday breakdown is like this, and understanding what their invoice looks like and how much work actually goes into direct market stores gives you an idea of, where you should position your focus, what kind of information you should be passing along, and really just streamlining as much as you can, because retailers just don't have enough time to even look at all the items that are coming out every week, let alone to, look at complicated incentives or things like that. So, I think that perspective has helped me a lot with Image and conveying, what it's really like on the front lines versus the perception of what it's like.
Yeah. Well, as somebody who I actually take great interest in the retailer world, I actually picked up like all the stuff that that retailers get. I had Diamond send me some stuff, and man, I have to admit, looking at that previous book, it's intimidating. It's so big, and it's like it's a lot to take in, especially for like newer retailers. Like I have to imagine that if you're kind of new to the game and you're opening up a new shop, that like there's kind of a I don't know. I don't want to say like it's kind of an obstacle in its own way, and it's just it's a knowledge barrier that you really have to break through. And I don't know, like I have to imagine that kind of experience would be extremely beneficial. But so one thing that I was curious about is I know that I've talked to some retailers or a lot of retailers, and some of them have told me that general idea about comic shops is about half of them don't actually carry anything besides Marvel and DC. It's pretty streamlined. I mean, some of them probably pick up Image titles, especially with how much you guys have grown. But it seems like for some of the publisher or some of the comic shops, you have to really, you know, make an effort to actually impact orders. So I was curious, as far as in your role and just Image as a whole, like how important is retailer outreach and kind of like how do you guys deal with retailers on both a larger scale and a macro scale and a micro scale to try to get them excited about your product?
I think just more logistics that we've been doing, that's kind of changing our newsletter to make sure it's as streamlined as possible and kind of take out the marketing speak and really just give it, nuts and bolts of what retailers need to make their decisions at FOC. Something that when I was a retailer, I think publishers don't recognize is that you're getting, hundreds of emails from publishers a week, Diamond dailies, update advisories for product changes. You're just being really inundated with information. So, we've definitely tried to communicate less with just what we need to communicate and not, promise retailers like this is the cover you need to check out. It's going to change your store. It's really just, here's your significant ordering information. Here's a one-line pitch about the book, the creators, any kind of, product information that might change your ordering. And I think the more retailers actually have respect for what you're telling them, the more they're going to actually check what you're saying. So, hopefully our change in that kind of communication has really impacted, if that newsletter is useful to them, and making sure that, when we do have secondary or, multiple newsletters going out, that it's really something that's actually going to turn into immediate sales in your store. So other than that, more kind of like overarching outreach I really am a big fan of is like the Diamond Retailer Summit and Comics Pro. Getting that kind of face time with retailers is really important because something that, having been a former member of Comics Pro, there's a lot of communication out there between each other, but not so much to publishers. Because there's, a lot of chatter and a lot of great ideas, complaints, really things that should be looked into, but it's not necessarily being communicated to publishers, which, once I got on this side, I was kind of surprised by all of the back and forth that I was so used to seeing between retailer to retailer. I was expecting to get once I had come to Image, but there's a little bit less direct communication, and hopefully by having that FaceTime presence, in person with retailers, so that they can see that I'm a real human being who has the actual experience being on their side, and I feel for them and I want to help them, that they feel a little bit more comfortable to reaching out. Because I've been at those roundtables many times, and I know it can sometimes feel like a publisher is just, there to be there and not necessarily taking ideas back or available. And some of it is just a matter of, there's only so much time in the day, and I can completely commiserate with that now. But, we really wanted to make sure that retailers, when they do speak with us, feel like we are here and available. And that's, a huge part of why we brought Jeff Stang on, so that we can actually build a sales team and have a lot more direct outreach. And I think for, 2016 and forward, having more individual calls with accounts, especially accounts who don't support Image in the kind of numbers that they might see as compared to their other similar discount tier, making sure to kind of build a relationship with those accounts, because I think kind of what you were speaking to with just the level of support we see from account to other publishers, there's a large majority of orders made up by a small majority of accounts. And I think, the more we can actually foster those relationships with accounts who might not be as familiar with our product, the more they're going to be more likely to actually take a shot on it. And, we've been trying to do some outreach just with we increased our store starter kit twofold to make sure that there's more titles available to new accounts and, getting them more familiar with our titles. And I think also communicating to them, these are the creators behind these books that you have a lot of success with through other publishers, and make them aware of that connection, because not all of them are. And, that's education. I think making that information available is step one. So that's what we're really working on for the next year, is kind of making sure that they have that correlation between creator for Image and other publishers.
Yeah, yeah. I'm actually curious. In your experiences at like Comics Pro and the Retailer Summit, do you kind of feel like the fact that you have a background in retail makes, I don't know, do you feel like that kind of like shows retailers that like maybe Image has empathy and understanding of their situation? Like, did you get any feedback like that from retailers you had spoken to?
I think once they recognize that, I've not only, was a retailer, but I've, did the ordering, and I'm really familiar with the kind of things they're doing, like day in, day out, they realize like that I'm not someone they have to explain how this works. And that was something I experienced a lot when I first started. I would get calls from retailers, and, and I don't want to always say like, oh, well, buddy, I've been there, because that's nice to hear, but,
every situation is different.
Them speak first, but once they go to explain, like, this is how FOC works for me, and I'm like, I've been there, did it every week, and they're like, oh, okay, then I can skip that whole step and just go right into, this is how it's affecting me. And I think there's a nice sense of, camaraderie between Image and retailers, knowing that Image clearly cares about the direct market, because they have two on staff. And I think, having us here as the ones who make the decisions that hopefully impact direct market sales says a lot, that these are people who really have an understanding of, like, what changes sales in stores, and not just something that makes sense on paper, but how does it actually implement, in the real world. So, I hope they feel that way. I definitely got some of that feedback at the most recent Diamond Retailer Summit, and that was, very rewarding to hear. I think also having Jeff join us, Jeff Stang, is that we're building a team here that they can have more than one person to reach out to. Image is a small team, but we're really making sure that we're growing in the areas that serve us the most, and that's always going to be the direct market.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, actually, so I want to ask you, and this is kind of maybe a deeper pull than you're used to being asked about, but I know at this year's Comics Pro, you guys rolled out some changes in terms of the percentage discount on orders for new retailers. And like it seems like you guys, Image as a whole, is really making both in adding yourself and Jeff, but also like in some of the moves you did, including that one at Comics Pro where you changed the discount. It seems like you guys are making a conscientious effort to be more aware and understanding of like what retailers are going through. And I was curious, like what was the response to that change in the discounts, or the discounting that you guys made at Comics Pro? Was that overall very, very positive?
It was, and that was actually feedback we got from a retailer that that, hey, you guys should do this, and we talked about it internally, and it's something that really spoke to us, and we thought was a great idea, and we went with. And I think we're really receptive to getting ideas from people on the front line and really making those changes. It's just, sitting on it and thinking about it and saying, how does this work for us, and how is this going to change the accounts it actually affects? And I think, like you were saying, for those new accounts, there is such a learning curve, and it's one that can so severely dictate their success and their failure if they have that understanding, or if they have that extra discount. That's the difference of staying in business the next year and maybe having to call it quits. It's, we want to make sure that, from us at least, that we're giving them as much opportunity to succeed as possible, because it's great to have accounts that are really big continue to succeed, but if we don't have new stores popping up and having success and encouraging other people to start their stores, we're going to see a plateau. And I think the more stores that are available, the more people are walking in off the street just to check out what they have. And, for me, the thing that's exciting about comics and what, really brought me into it is the community and the atmosphere in a store. So the more and more that's available internationally and domestically, the more we're going to see comics grow.
Hmm. The thing I really liked about that move was the fact that it both kind of felt like a an investment in the future of the comic industry by Image, in the sense that you guys are giving a greater discount, but it's also like, because you're giving a greater discount, it's giving them more benefit for trying more Image comics, and so it's kind of like an
Right.
investment in the future. So especially given the fact I think you extended it from like the window for that discount from 3 months to a year, and that's really great. I mean, like, I have to admit, one of the thing that I'd most want to do in comics is actually own my own shop, because one of my favorite parts about comics is really just the comic shop experience. And as somebody who would like to do that in the future, I have to imagine that is just it's a game changer for a lot of people. And yeah.
We think so. I mean, it's and if nothing else, to accounts who already have established accounts and they aren't starting new locations. I mean, showing them and the market at large that we are not just thinking about the immediate gratification of turnover with sales. We're trying to think about 5 years from now, 10 years from now. So I think hopefully that's represented in our decisions. And while I think some people might take issue with some of the decisions we've made in the short term, and we're really trying to think about where are comics going to be 10 years from now. So hopefully that's something that most retailers and the market at large, fans, understand with these kind of announcements.
So one question I was curious about, and I know that, I mean, Image is a creator-owned publisher. It's the entire basis of who Image is. And as a person who promotes to the direct market, I'm curious, like, do you focus on kind of just Image as a whole, or do you focus on individual comics, or like is there like I guess I'm just curious as to whether or not like the promoting individual books is left to the creators, or if you do that as well.
I mean, that's something we definitely do, especially for the direct market at the launch of a series. I mean, that's the most crucial time to really communicate, what is interesting and special about the series and how it's going to work for you within your store. So, I mean, from a direct market perspective, we're really focused on the launch and the first trade. I mean, that's something that you can continue to promote with new arcs and make sure that retailers are aware. And that's something that we'll see changing in our previews, is making that, indication of a new story arc or the finale of a story arc is more obvious, so that if that's something that's going to impact your orders by, padding more before trade, or being ready to have anyone who's read the trade jump on from the new arc. I mean, we're definitely looking at those ways to promote, but again, there is such limited airspace within all of our titles, and making sure that we're highlighting what's best at the right time, that we really, try and hit each book for when it makes the most sense, rather than just hammering over and over and over again. For all of our titles, we're trying to give each of them breadth and space to get the most out of their, promotion.
Yeah. Now, I don't know what you were a fan of before, but I have to imagine, that it makes your job a little bit easier that Image produces some pretty dang good comics. Is that a fair assumption?
Yes. Image was my favorite publisher before I got here, and, I couldn't be more excited to be here. And I think, getting to call a retailer and say, like, hey, I think you're going to love this, it's not just my job, it's something that I genuinely believe. So it's nice to hear when I'm pitching something that the retailer is absolutely excited and couldn't be more thrilled to have a new series by a certain creator. It's really, rewarding to see series that come across our office, and I just can't wait for it. And then you see the reaction in the direct market. I mean, it really is, you do feel a part of the team. And, it's, while everything's creator owned, we definitely take a lot of pride in our creator success, and couldn't be more excited to, work on these titles.
Yeah, yeah. No, I mean, it's it's really cool as a fan to be able to like pick up a book like Island, which is like completely unlike everything that's being produced today. And it's really fun, or it's really interesting, and there's really great comics in there from a bunch of different types of creators. And it's like, I don't know. I mean, it just seems like it would be a lot more exciting being able to promote things that you're yourself into. But in a general sense, like, where does your fandom come from? Like, what kind of comic fan would you say you are? Like, what are you into, I guess?
I would say, I mean, that's changed a lot over the years.
Yeah.
But right now, I'm very excited by slice of life comics. I mean, I think really human stories at their core, and not so much genre driven, are the
Sure.
things that I really respond to. I mean, right now, Plutona is, when that is, in my stack, it's the first thing I read. I just can't wait to read it.
Hmm.
I mean, I've really always been kind of interested by just human conflict and how we kind of arise from that. And I think that's where people speak, Saga speaks so much to them because, while there's a lot of genre elements happening with sci-fi and fantasy, it's really, a story about this couple and a family. And when their life is thrown into chaos, how do they, come out of it? So, I mean, I think that's, if you look at all our most successful series, that's what you're going to find at its core. Is they're really, really human stories and not dictated by, genre or event or things like that.
Yeah, it was funny. I actually talked to John Arcudi on my podcast like a month ago or so, and I was talking to him about like, I mean, I'm sure you've probably read Rumble, and Rumble is obviously just like a mishmash of, theoretically a mishmash of a bunch of different genres, and like John told me, roughly speaking, like he's like, what genre is life? Like, life is everything. It can be like a, horror, or it can be a comedy, or it can be a tragedy, or it can be drama, depending on the situation. And like, like you were talking about Plutona, it's like the overarching idea, I guess, behind it is that it's about these kids discovering a dead superhero. But the thing that impressed me the most about that first issue was just like how human those kids felt. Like those felt like real
Oh,
kids.
for sure. Yep. I mean, that's, I think, something Jeff Lemire really excels at. I mean, all of his books, there's humanity depicted like you really don't experience it in other comics, and I think that's what really brings people to his titles. And I think you see that in a lot of our books, that there's really, while you might have a sci-fi epic or a noir story, it's really about people overcoming their demons and facing what it is to be human. And I think that's at the end of the day what people are interested in reading.
Yeah, yeah. I have to admit, I don't get mad at comics very often, but I was a little mad at the Southern Bastards team because they made me actually kind of care about Coach Boss, and I didn't think
Yeah,
I didn't think that was possible. I was like, this guy's a
I
villain.
I know exactly what you mean. Yep.
Yeah. I actually like tweeted something along those lines, and I was just like, I had a couple people reach out to me and be like, yeah, man, I can't believe they made me care about it. And I was like, as if that was like some sort of villainous act.
Right. Yeah.
So to get back to the general promotion of comics, one of the things, like I know my shop. Again, I live in Anchorage, Alaska, and my shop is Bosco's Comics up here, and I know that they've used. You guys have like a kind of like standout black, like a stand-up display for Image Comics that has like Image written on it. It's all black, and it's a really
Yeah.
great way to show. I know that they put like the number ones that were discounted up on there, and it's a really great way to display the materials. And I'm curious as to like how much Image looks into kind of aiding in-store sales with things like that. Like, how important is that aspect of your job?
I mean, that's definitely something we think about a lot. I mean, when we first launched that program, it was something we had, a different logo on, and we're trying to think of ways to encourage people to use that as an additional tool to sell things. But something we heard almost instantly from retailers was that this makes this a different product, this changes who my customer is, and decreases my likelihood of selling number two, because you might have someone just coming in to get the even though it's just a different color logo, a different style logo, it's a variant because of that. So, we immediately changed our response on that, and then, changed our quantity we were sending, really trying to tailor it to make it sure that it was a tool that was actually effective for retailers. And, that the the Image Comics Floor Display program is what that's called.
Mm-hmm.
And what we're essentially looking at is if there's something that we feel that didn't get the kind of support, or that, it had a really strong support, but we saw additional opportunity for further demand past what final orders were, we did consignment for those titles. So I think it was something that, based on the level of returns we saw, that was absolutely successful, because we got very few of them back. But it's really just about getting that kind of visibility in stores, because, having worked in both, I worked at Barnes & Noble and then working at the Laughing Ogre, so much of just visibility and display is what get someone to pick up a book they've never thought about. It's, making sure that something that a retailer can from the counter just point at is so valuable, because if you've been in a store on a Wednesday or been behind a counter on a Wednesday, you know that there's just only so much time you have to hand sell every book, and you need a tool that can kind of aid in that. So that was really the genesis for the floor display program. But we definitely are looking at programs not just to increase the sales on the issue that was included in that program. We want to make sure that's dictating increase in sales on, subsequent issues for that series. And I think, we saw a lot of additional sales in that issue, but it didn't necessarily have the impact that we wanted to have for that series over the long run. So, we're looking at changing kind of our selections for that, making sure it's a little bit more positioned for retailers to be able to say, like, okay, well, you grabbed the number one, well, here's the number two, and making sure that, now that we have more inventory available with our print run mentality shift, that if we do send a number two, there's plenty of number one to make sure that, those can convert into actual series consumers. So, we are looking at other programs similar to that, but at the end of the day, we're trying to keep it as simple as possible. And, some of the programs we were looking at for 2016, managing returns is a lot. I think, when you get your invoice and you see everything you have to then go and strip covers for and, count out, make sure that someone's responsible for doing that every week, taking it to FedEx, it's not as cut and dry as a lot of publishers imagine. I would argue that some of those when you don't get a return back, it's not necessarily because it's sold, it's because the retailer missed it or they didn't have time to do the return. So we want to really make sure that, we are getting the most out of our program and not just taking advantage of the fact that a retailer's time is only so, limited. So.
Yeah. It seems like that is maybe for most of the creators or retailers I've spoken to, time is their most precious commodity, and it's kind of something they're constantly battling against. It's something in there you said, like the display really stands out to me because, and this is an anecdote I bring up all the time. My wife, every once in a while, like the first time she went into a comic shop with me, she looked at it and she was like, "How do you know what to buy?" Like, she was perplexed because it's just there's infinite choice, and it's hard to decide where to start, especially if you haven't read comics before. And as a person, she is a she really enjoys like genre fiction novels of all varieties. She loves comic book movies, she likes comic book TV shows, all kinds of stuff like that. So she's like a natural mark, but she just finds the whole marketplace kind of intimidating. And I think part of that ties into some retailers have told me that they actually have shared with me that they think there's too many comics today. Like, there's almost too many being published. And that actually, again, ties into something else where I read something from Anthony Johnston, who said that the greatest enemy of creator-owned comics is obscurity. With so much on the market, it's hard to be able to really make a dent on there. So one thing I'm curious about is, what does the Image team do to try to make an impact in an increasingly packed market? Because there are so many releases, but what can you do to try to make a book like Plutona stand out, I guess?
Well, I think making sure that where you position a release is as advantageous for that series as possible is something that we're definitely becoming more aware of. There's only so much you can do to position yourself against other publishers without knowing their lineup, but
right.
Within your own lineup, making sure that the customer who's coming in for, a like title, that they're aware of that book because it's coming out in the same week, or making sure that, they have something they can look at as a natural path of when someone comes to the counter and has, Descender, I can say like, "Oh, did you check out the new Lemire title?"
Mm-hmm.
Something as simple as that is, I would say, one of the retailer's most strongest sales tools is just making sure that they have something immediately positioned they can say, "Oh, we like this, we should try this."
Yeah.
That's definitely an easy way to kind of target that problem. But I would absolutely agree that there's we've reached, a point where there's only so many spaces on the rack every month.
Mm-hmm.
And, you've got 200, 300 new items on your invoice every week. It's just a matter of where do you put it. So
right.
having our titles spread out within the month so that there's space for a retailer to look at it. It's, the gem of the month or gem of the week on FOC, however you want to think of it in your own mind.
Mm-hmm.
The retailer says, okay, this is my new number one from Image. These are the people I'm positioning it with. And having that information available to them in a way that's really easy to view is something we've been trying to work on. But also, I think a shift we've been making, and it's something I talked to retailers about at the Diamond Retailer Summit, was having our books come out so that there's an extra week of sales information before you have to order your number two. So essentially, if you had a number one releasing the first week of the month, number two would then the next month come out the second week. So rather than only having 6 days of sales information before you FOC, you have another week. So that's something that I think Image titles specifically have a little bit longer shelf life. That's a lot of feedback we've received from retailers, is that it might not be until issue 2 or 3 where really the hook kicks in for a series and you'll have a flood of people coming in. But that extra week, there's so many factors that can change whether or not a series hits. If you sell out on Wednesday and you have to order the next title on Monday, it's hard to say, did I sell 50 and that's all I could have sold, or could I have sold 100? Giving them that extra week to get the reorders for what's, picking up steam, continue that momentum to really get a general sense of, this is not just my 1 week sales, this is my ceiling for my store. So allowing retailers to have a little bit more time to see where, the parameter for success is a big thing that I think we'll see some impact on for orders on number two, because, one of the things retailers are so cautious about is having dead overstock lying around. And that's, we want to make sure that we give them the time to really, restock with reorders and see where a series can go for them. So, we understand that retailers are nervous about over ordering. So we want to give them a shot to kind of, where do you really think this can go? So hopefully, we'll be rolling that out later in 2016. You'll see that space on the direct market side between 1 and 2, just to give it a little bit more space, within its own lineup.
Yeah. So what you're saying is the number ones will now come out basically 2 weeks ahead of FOC for number two.
Essentially, yes.
Oh, that's huge. That's really great, because I know that so much of it is based off of in-store sales, as you well know, and being able to have more time to put that data together. It's got to be it could be very impactful for them, and that's really, really great. One other tool that I think is interesting, I guess it's not really a tool, it's just pricing, but from the retailers you've spoken to, how important have you found the first volume $9.99 trades to be?
It's funny you should ask that, because we, Jeff and I at the Retailer Summit were taking notes in every round table, and we had at least 2 people per group tell us how important that price point is to them, and how, please don't ever do away with that, because this is something that, we can just hand sell all day long. And you're more likely to sell 2 $99 trades than one $19.99 trade. And even if it's just a difference of, a little bit of tax here and there, if it's dollars to donuts, you can sell more of them. People want to feel like they're getting a deal, and it's an easy way to get a reader into something they might otherwise never have tried.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I've heard that from several retailers, and even myself. Honestly, $9.99 is I more or less try out any Image book that I don't buy a number one on. I'm very willing to buy the first volume just because it's $9.99, and that makes a huge difference for me. And it's especially for people who have very casual interest in it. It gives a much lower barrier to entry, and that's exciting to hear that, because I kind of felt like that was the way, but it's good to hear that you actually got that feedback.
I've experienced it firsthand, but hearing it over and over again, among our biggest retail partners, it's working. And you look at the sales information on those volume ones, and it's just, I think also that there's becoming, a new group of comic readers who really are brand new to the medium, and they're going trade first, and getting them, locked in on a series at trade, and then jumping on a single issue. That's huge, because rack sales are always going to be, I think, where a retailer is really able to grow their market. If they can get people in on the trade, but then turn them into monthly subscribers, or weekly, that's how you really build your business. And I think, a 9.99 trade gives you an opportunity to really do that. I mean, how many retailers out there have seen someone jump off of a Saga trade and say, like, when's the next issue out?
Yeah.
I can't wait, 6 months. So, I mean, that's huge. Getting people in your store on a monthly basis or weekly basis, I mean, that's really all you can ask for.
Yeah, I've been that person, and it is interesting to see because, like, most of the time there's the idea that sales will kind of like decrease until they level out and find a level that they're set at. But for books like Saga, you see like its sales have increased since launch, and I do think that having those trades, like I've seen it with people that I know that like they'll pick up the first trade of something and then they switch to single issues. But that's one thing that I was curious about is like, how does form impact your approach? Because I know Image publishes minis and publishes ongoings, and then you have like that the new graphic novel coming from Steven Siegel and the artist whose name I do not remember on Camp Midnight. I apologize, artist whose name I don't remember. But does that impact your approach at all as to how you promote the books, or is that just I don't know? Is it just kind of one and the same?
Well, I mean, I mean, for Camp Midnight specifically, because it is an all ages book, that it really does change how we promote a book and where we're looking to make sure that this has the most exposure. So, I mean, with a book like that, the book market is something that, what kind of format are they responding to? How is this positioned against other kids' books? And, where can we look at the impact of, trim size and all that kind of stuff? That's with kids' content, especially, format is crucial. But I think that always it's going to be how we feel the content reads best. There's some that, I might think would do better as an OGN, but like we really think that the single issues are going to be what impacts the trade sales more than it just coming out as a standalone. So
Sure.
I mean, there's times to think about it. I think especially when you get creators who do have so many books coming out, and OGN can be really significant, and so like this is something and you love, and there's going to be no hesitation for you to buy this OGN. Because I mean, I think a lot of people wonder, if I have, so many series, am I cannibalizing my own sales? And it's, being conscious of there's only so many dollars in a customer's pocket to spend every week. And that's not to say that you can't do, 5-6 series within each month, but just being aware of that people don't have an endless supply of, income. It's something that they might say, I really want this, but, I only have $30 to spend. So making sure that we're conscious of, what the content reads best as is where the creator is positioned against their own backlist or against their own monthly releases. And those are all things we're thinking about.
Yeah, it's funny. I actually had never really thought of single issues building to trade sales, but that actually makes a lot of sense. I mean, especially for, I guess, minis, because it's like it can build its market or can build interest, and then people are like, I'm going to buy this in trade and get really amped about it.
And there's, that's something that does impact mini-series sales, is that you have something you might think like, wait, I really expected this to have higher numbers, but I mean, having been in the store, I can't tell you how many times I heard a customer say like, oh, it's a mini-series, I'll just wait for trade.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's just being aware that if you do have a limited series, you're going to see that happen, that it's not necessarily the orders are, not where they should be. They might just be splintered because you have a reader who's really, a trade collector, or someone who, if it's not an ongoing, they don't want single issues. So it's just being aware of that and making sure that, we are putting it out in the best possible format for it to have the most success.
So I want to talk about one thing that came out from the Retailer Summit that, pretty much everybody reported on. And it was, you had made, this is coming secondhand, of course, but you had made comments at the Retailer Summit about how Image isn't doing variant covers anymore. Could you elaborate on that? Like, what exactly was the story on that?
So what I was discussing was in reference to a statement we put out in May about no longer allowing single-issue retailer exclusive variants. So I've heard some people say like, oh my God, no more alternate covers, but what I'm talking about specifically is single-issue retailer exclusives. So when you have an account buying 1,000 of one cover and that cover not being available to anyone else. That's what we're talking about. So no longer allowing those in single issue format, but now moving to allow them in trade and hardcover. So it's something we thought about pretty extensively. And one of the first things that, I did when I got here was really look at single issue retailer exclusives and how they impact those accounts' subsequent issue orders. So, is this something that is actually translating into increased opportunity to push a series, or is it something that's giving a retailer a large opportunity on a secondary market like eBay? I mean, where are we seeing these impact our creators? So, that's something that it was not an easy decision to make, and we didn't want to necessarily exclude retailers from having that opportunity to have, a store exclusive. We just wanted it to be in a format that's actually benefiting the series as a whole and what we believe is, the most responsible for the market over the next, 15 years. So.
Yeah. So it's not that you guys are getting rid of variants; it's just that you're getting rid of the single issue retailer incentives, which makes a lot of sense. It is kind of funny how that came out as not that, but it actually, one thing that I've talked to several creators before, and I know that this was something that like Rick Remender and Sean Murphy specifically weren't doing on Tokyo Ghost, was they weren't doing variants because they kind of found that it doesn't, like kind of what you were saying, where like the variants can help boost sales in a short-term sense, but it doesn't actually impact lasting sales. It doesn't create a realistic opening level, so to speak.
Right.
That's just kind of generally what your perspective is on that?
It is. We see, and this isn't to belittle a retailer who would participate in those, because I completely know the financial investment in a retailer exclusive is not something that they take lightly. They're really doing because they think it's going to be successful for them. But we were trying to look at, okay, well, does by creating a frenzy on the secondary market actually increase continuing sales? And the answer we found was no, it doesn't. So it really was, does having these exclusive formats and single issue create a longer benefit? And we really just had to ask, what's the purpose of these exclusives? Is it to make a lot of, money for the secondary market, or is it to actually give our series a longer shelf life? So, I know I've talked to a lot of retailers who do feel like, hey, I can sell that number one for 2 years if I still have that in stock. But I've talked to just as many retailers who, if the single issue exclusive doesn't do well, they have 600 copies of something they can't move. Mm-hmm. And, there's something there that we don't want to have, and that's copies and copies available of things that people can't do anything with. That's a huge investment that there is no return on. So by having an evergreen product like a trade or a hardcover, it might take you a year or 2 years to sell through all of your copies, but you're going to do it, and you're going to get all of your money back, and you're going to actually turn those sales into new customers, into new series, readers. It's something that we felt really strongly that we want to make sure if we're doing this, we're doing it in a way that's going to bring back readers and not just benefit the collector.
Mm-hmm. So for the trade in hardcover, you're saying that you guys are doing variants specific for those for retailers, or what?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Well, the last question I actually have for you is a much more general one. There's a lot of talk out there about like all the not so good things that are happening in comics, and one thing I always like to ask people about on this show is what has them excited about comics. So, Corey, what has you the most excited about where comics are at today? Not necessarily just Image, but just comics in general.
I think for me, something I'm really passionate about, and that, as a retailer, was really important to me, was making sure that we were fostering, the future of the industry by making more product that's available to kids.
Yeah.
And that's something that, admittedly, Image has not had a lot of kids titles or kid-friendly titles. And that's something that I feel very strongly about, and making sure that, we do it for the right book, that actually we feel like we have a good chance to get into direct market stores, because we do see an odd conversion between book market success with kids' books and direct market success. So for whatever reason, the direct market hasn't really been able to capitalize on how many kids and parents are going into bookstores. And that's, I think, a lot of it just about awareness and making sure that, there are plenty of accounts out there who don't know how big of a success Smile is, or, making sure that they have those available and titles that are familiar to, kids and parents, and working within their communities. And I think something that I'm really excited about is there seems to have been a shift in the last, year to 2 years about making content that's more all age friendly and, young adult friendly. And that's something that I think, you can do in a way that's just, hey, we want to fill a quota and here's a kid's book. That's not going to go over well if the book doesn't do well. So it's making sure that we're really careful in the titles we select and give them a really good opportunity for success. And I think the more and more we see publishers investing in that kind of content, the more success retailers are going to have with it, and how it's going to translate into actually growing, a 5-year-old into being a customer for life. And that's the kind of thing that, I know plenty of people who came in with their mom or dad and said, I want to read a comic, and you can only give them so many titles.
Right.
There's not a lot of places on the comic rack that are safe for a 9-year-old. So, I think that's something where manga has really had a lot of success, is having, content available for those in-between ages that doesn't feel,
like it's
kind
talking
of like
down to them.
kiddie, or, right. It's something that, kids are voracious readers, and you get them hooked on a series, they're going to be back, next weekend. And I've seen that with manga sales when I was a retailer. If you have these incredible backlists, series with 60 volumes, and you can really bring someone in and make them feel part of the comics community at a young age. But I think we're sort of starting to see that shift happen in single issue series and mainstream comics, but it's not quite where I want it to be. But I think something that I'm very excited about seeing where that can go in the next few years.
Yeah, I actually did a week of articles back in January when I was still with Multiversity Comics, and it was called All Ages Week, and it was just a focus on, kind of how the industry is shifting, like where what's the preferred format, things like that. And you said that, Camp Midnight being a graphic novel, I think that's huge because, as you said, it's a better fit for the market because, I don't know if a book like Smile, not that it isn't a great comic because it is, but I don't know if it would have been nearly as popular if it was a monthly comic. If it was
Right.
if it was a monthly comic, I don't think it would be nearly the sensation it is. But I know that Camp Midnight is a graphic novel, and I had Otis Frampton on Twitter had told me that Oddly Normal was going to be a trade, or just trades instead of single issues going forward. And I think that makes a huge difference in terms of both the book market and the direct market, because I think it just is an easier sell for both parents and kids if they get a more perceived complete story.
Right. And that's, I think the more conscious we are of, what is being successful in the book market and how we can translate that to the direct market. And that's something, Image has been very, very interested in, and over the last few months really dedicated a lot of time to seeing, especially for kids content, what can we do to make this more appealing to your average book market buyer who's not walked into a comic book store. And I think, for Free Comic Book Day, you have so many kids and parents walking into stores and making sure that they see formats that they're familiar with and positioning that in a way that they're, familiar with. It's kind of giving them something they can immediately say, I feel safe giving this to my child. I don't have to go up and ask someone, is this okay? I don't know. And that's, a larger problem within comics is our ratings system is, not universal and not at all, indicative of the content. So
Right.
It's, really publishers taking that upon themselves to address in a way that's right for them, short of having a universal rating system is something that I think, will help with converting book market buyers into comic buyers.
Mm-hmm. This is an anecdote I just want to share from this morning. My coworker, I've been slowly but surely converting her kids into comic readers, and like I got like I shared Smile with her daughter, and her daughter became like Raina Telgemeire's like biggest fan. Like she's like a super fan now. Anyways, and her son's 10th birthday was just this like it was just yesterday, and she asked me to go to the comic shop with her and pick out a comic for him, and I suggested getting Amulet by Kazu Kibuishi because that's a comic I love. And anyways, and it was funny because she like he opened his presents and everything, and he opened up he got Amulet, and he was like, oh, a book. And then he opened it up, he's like, it's a comic, ah! And he got really amped.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I mean, it's just I do think that there's interest there, and I am happy to see when you guys announced Camp Midnight at Image Expo. I thought that was a really great thing because I know Eric has told me in the past that he'd like to have more all ages stuff. So it's good to see like those things coming up.
I think it's just a matter of trying to find the right book to fit within our lineup, because I mean, just doing it to do it, and that's a lot of I think the phenomena of like everyone's saying how important building this readership is, but at the same time I don't know that we're really thinking about it as a market, saying like how do we do this in a way that actually is successful, and not just to say here's a list of the ones you can give to your kids. It's saying like here's a list of the ones that your kids are going to love,
right?
And, not just pass over, but I'm definitely excited to see what we do in that regard over the next few years.
I am too. Well, that's actually all I have for you, Corey, and I really appreciate you coming on, especially week of New York Comic Con.
Sure
But
thing.
best of luck with everything going forward, and I'm excited to see what you guys have next.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Off Panel with guest Corey Murphy, the director of sales at Image Comics. You can find more sketch content at Sketched. That's SKTCHD.com. Follow us on Twitter at @sketchcomic, and like us on Facebook at /sketched. Thanks for listening, and tune in next week for another episode.